today on the Frontline Health podcast.
I think before we jump to this conclusion that, hey, Tylenol is the end all be all when it comes to autism, it can be one component of it, but there may be others that are there. And, we can't say that Tylenol is the sole cause for it, but it certainly can be one of several causes that can bring about autism. And as long as we're open and as long as they're transparent, I think it allows us to truly make a decision. And, the decision for my family and my wife and I, when we're talking about kids, whether we take Tylenol should be truly a decision we make, but we need to have all the information. And I think
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Health podcast by Centurion Health, where we share health news, tips, and insights to help you take ownership of your health. I'm Evan Patrick. Troy Dool, founder and CEO of Centurion Health, is here with me, and we are bringing you some of the latest health headlines in today's episode. Troy, so much crazy stuff has happened in the past month. We really have a lot to talk about today.
there has been a lot that's been on the move within the health world for sure in the last month.
For sure. I mean, everything from pregnancy to Tylenol to synthetic dyes, a lot to talk about. Why don't you get us started with our first article?
Yeah, so the first headline we have today is study links sugary drinks to colorectal cancer spreading elsewhere in the body. The sub-headline on that article says daily diet matters not only for cancer risk, but also for how the disease progresses once it has developed, said the lead researcher in the Texas study. What they found was that drinking those sugary beverages, anything that contained a lot of glucose or fructose, really made those colorectal cancer cells more mobile, and it kind of sped up the spread of it, especially to the liver. And they linked it to a particular enzyme called SORD, SORD, which kind of drives that glucose metabolism and cholesterol pathways. And they suggested that if you lowered that sugary drink intake, which would lower and kind of block that SORD pathway, then it's going to help limit that cancer progression. So what we would say certainly looks bad by increasing that sugary drink load and increasing the spread of cancer. I think it's allowed science to look at it and say this may be a progression that we can look at to stop the spread by inactivating that enzyme SORD in the body and hopefully keep cancer from spreading quite as fast.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think people are definitely paying a lot closer attention to their food and drink labels that they're looking at. And we know that there's some differences definitely with the type of sugars that we're consuming that plays a big role in different aspects of our health. I'm wondering, Troy, what do you think? Is this risk likely linked to high fructose corn syrup that we know is used in a lot of highly processed foods and beverages? I know you've talked about the difference between glucose and fructose on this show before, or do you think this is really could be connected to any type of sugar?
Yeah, I think most of the studies certainly suggest that if you're having sugar that is a more natural sugar, meaning it's coming from fruits or vegetables, and you're getting it in a whole food scenario, that it's not linked to that same spread of cancer. And we know that it doesn't seem to accelerate it as much, but definitely anytime you're having added sugar or processed sugar or even fruit juices in some cases that have high amounts of sugar without the fiber, they have certainly seen that it helps facilitate the growth of that cancer and the spread of it. So it's not, this actually just supports what we've already known that sugar and increased sugar intake is certainly part of the issue when it comes to cancer, and it kind of feeds that cancer, gives it something to grow on. So certainly recommend avoiding sugar at all cost if at all possible during somebody who may be having cancer or suffering from cancer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a big part of so many people's daily routines. You don't necessarily think about cancer risk from just grabbing a soda out of the refrigerator, putting it in the shopping cart at the store. We really know that there are a lot of pretty serious risks for people out there. What are some of the other risks associated with these sugary drinks?
Yeah, I mean, certainly cancer and the spread of cancer, but we know that fatty alcohol liver disease or having a fatty liver, that is something that has been associated with increased sugar intake. And then, lots of the others like increased chance of diabetes, obesity. We know that there's high blood pressure that's involved. And then one of the ones that I think is even more astounding is this, what they consider type 3 diabetes now, because they've linked all this sugar intake to even Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and they're calling it type 3 diabetes. So there are a lot of things that we're beginning to understand as we add more sugar to our foods to try to make them taste better and increase our appetite for certain foods. That is causing a whole host of issues, with cancer being certainly at the top of the list, but the others that we're already aware of, which would be diabetes, obesity, and now liver disease, and even Alzheimer's and dementia.
Mhm. I grew up drinking sodas pretty regularly. Now, at this point, I really don't drink any sodas at all. And I'm a firm believer that, like, if you're trying to stop a habit, you have to kind of replace it with something else. I know you and I have both found that something we previously thought we would not enjoy at all, which is the sparkling carbonated water.
Yes,
Whether it's LaCroix or Waterloo, something that's flavored with natural flavors that doesn't have sugar in it. I think we have both found to be a great alternative, and it really is an acquired taste. I've talked to different people in my family who drink a lot of sodas about it. I'm like, you just got to give it a shot, try it, stick with it, and you'll start to enjoy those flavored waters maybe just as much as your sodas, and you could actually replace what's bad for you with something healthy.
absolutely. And it does take a little bit of time. I do remember, I confess that I made fun of my
Oh,
wife that she was drinking them and other people who would
yeah.
drink them. And now I find myself having one on a fairly regular basis, and have found to acquire that taste for sure. So they're good.
I was with you too. Don't knock it till you try it.
That's right.
Our next health headline: Apples protect against stroke and feed your gut. How to get the most inexpensive, how to get the most. Inexpensive and versatile, this humble all-American fruit gives you plenty of reasons to love it. Some of the benefits that are mentioned in this article are heart and stroke protection. So apples rich in fiber and antioxidants like quercetin help reduce cholesterol, support blood vessel health, and lower the risk of stroke by up to 27%. As far as the gut health benefits, apple pectin boosts beneficial gut bacteria, improves digestion, and may help relieve constipation while supporting overall gut health. Diabetes and beyond. Regular apple consumption is linked to reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, potential cancer protection, slower cognitive decline, and strong nutritional value because of the fiber, vitamin C, the potassium, all of the different nutrients that we know are so beneficial that are in apples. Troy, does this put apples in the category of a superfood?
Well, I think it certainly helps solidify the old saying that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And because of that, I think you could probably throw it into the superfood realm. But, we were talking a little bit. What does that do if I want to have something that's apple flavored or apple cider? Do those have the same effect on the body? Uh, which I think is a good question, but the apple cider itself, probably not as good because it's loaded with sugar outside of just the apple. If you're having the apple cider vinegar, heard lots of wonderful things about that. And I think there's plenty of evidence that shows the apple cider vinegar is certainly still good for us and our gut health and several other things that can go along with it.
So you know that I'm a big fan of the fall beverages. I won't shy away from the occasional PSL, the pumpkin spice latte. I'm also a big fan of the hot apple cider. So you're saying not all the time, but maybe once in a while it's not too bad for me.
Yeah, I think the reason we probably like that hot apple cider is because it's loaded with sugar, and we just talked about how sugar can be an accelerant for some things, and certainly not real good for us. But again, I think if you're doing it in moderation and you're watching where you're getting sugar elsewhere, having a splurge every once in a while isn't a bad thing at all.
Only in the fall.
That's right. only in the fall. When those as soon as the pumpkin spice latte comes out, it's time to step it up again and start going after the apple cider as well.
That's right.
All right. So obviously, an apple a day can keep the doctor away, but this next headline is one that probably brought a lot of shock to most people because I think we've all thought that Tylenol was a fairly safe product out there. And this headline certainly speaks to maybe something a little bit different. It says there may be a postnatal link between Tylenol use and autism, researcher says. And they go on to have a subtitle that says the greatest vulnerability arises after birth when infants can no longer rely on their mother's liver metabolism. So that is an interesting headline because a lot of the headlines we talked about or have seen talked about how Tylenol use during pregnancy was a big issue. This is
Mhm.
actually speaking about Tylenol use post pregnancy. So after the child's born and they're having Tylenol for any fever or any sickness at all, I think that surprised a lot of people because most are aware that you shouldn't give um, a leave or any NSAIDs like ibuprofen to a child because of the potential issues with that. And they've always thought that Tylenol was a safe alternative.
Mhm.
But this is saying otherwise. And it does make sense because the Tylenol is metabolized in the liver. And as a young individual, somebody who's just born, it's very, very difficult on the liver and it's very hard on the liver. And it's the number one, Tylenol is the number one way for people to kill themselves in Great Britain. So, and it does it by destroying the liver. So obviously it's got a big effect on the liver. And this is going on to say that maybe there's a link with autism, which to me was pretty shocking.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at a really interesting moment right now. Just sort of as a society, we really have to kind of take a step back and just ask for transparency. Try to look at what the data and the studies are actually telling us. Call on the pharmaceutical companies to be forthright and honest about the things that they're touting as safe. Holding our government officials accountable for holding the pharmaceutical companies accountable for that transparency. You just see the reactions, I think, to people, and you can understand how it would be emotional for certain parents. I mean, talking about the during pregnancy, the risks, you can imagine that a mother who might have an autistic child who maybe took Tylenol during pregnancy because she was told that it was safe by her doctor, who probably genuinely believed that. Um, you know, I think some of these people are taking some of these findings as an affront to them, saying, "Hey, you're a bad mom because you did this," or they're having these strong kind of emotional reactions, and they just want to deny any evidence that there could be a link here. But I think we just have to show ourselves some grace and have some humility, and really just kind of talk about next steps, right? Like what do we do going forward from here, and not see this as a political moment, um, not see this as a moment to chug Tylenol and just out of
Yeah.
out of protest or rebellion against these findings. It's really interesting that that's kind of the reaction some people are having.
And it really is kind of a sad moment when you think about that we have somehow decided that this is a political statement to say that Tylenol could bring on autism. Really, it should be, does the science show that it brings on autism? Is
Mhm.
there a risk that goes with it? And then if there is, then let's dive in deeper and see how far this really goes. And I think there's a level of guilt even with some people who maybe women had taken Tylenol or taken acetaminophen and they ended up having a child with autism, as you said. There's that level of guilt that they have, but ultimately there shouldn't be any guilt for anybody because we didn't know any better. We weren't exposed to all of the literature about Tylenol and acetaminophen. I was actually talking about this with a gentleman when this statement came out about Tylenol, and his wife just got out of the hospital and they had loaded her up on Tylenol and acetaminophen because she had an infection and a fever that just wasn't coming down. And you could see the concern on in his eyes when we were talking about it. But ultimately, there's not much he can do because they were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. And but I think this does roll into the next headline that talks about the Tylenol maker said in internal emails evidence of link to autism, quote, starting to feel heavy, unquote. And the emails came to light during a litigation against Johnson and Johnson in 2018. And why we haven't heard anything about that until now. And there was actually a tweet by Johnson and Johnson at the time that mentioned it 8 years ago, and the link to potential autism. So there are some things that are out there. They've since sold Tylenol to another company that didn't see that there. And I think before we jumped to this conclusion that, hey, Tylenol is the end all be all when it comes to autism, it can be one component of it, but there may be others that are there. And, we can't say that Tylenol is the sole cause for it, but it certainly can be one of several causes that can bring about autism. And as long as we're open and as long as they're transparent, I think it allows us to truly make a decision. And, the decision for my family and my wife and I, when we're talking about kids, whether we take Tylenol should be truly a decision we make, but we need to have all the information. And I think you would feel the same if your wife were to get pregnant. You just want to know what are the downsides of taking this, and then you can make that decision of, hey, is it okay for us to take it, or do I just want to push off and see if I can push through whatever pain I'm having and find other ways that maybe don't have the same link to autism or any of the other diseases that they've talked about.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there with people just wanting to be able to make an informed decision. This is sort of reminiscent, I think, of examples where drug companies in the past have kind of suspected that there could be some side effect. I'm not putting this at all in the same category, but with the opioid crisis with OxyContin. There was early evidence that was known that these were highly addictive drugs, and that information was not made public, and so people could not really fully assess whether that was something that they wanted to take, or the healthcare providers really couldn't assess to the best of their ability whether it was something to put their patient on. And so yeah, I just think more transparency is better, and yeah, people need to be able to make these informed decisions, and that should be communicated, and the chips should fall where they lie.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
But we do know one of the things that was mentioned. This is another headline with these findings related to Tylenol use during pregnancy and autism, that leucovorin could be a promising new treatment for autism. Here's why: the connection between autism and leucovorin began with an unexpected detour. Leucovorin, a form of folate, which we know quite a bit about here at Centurion, has been FDA approved as the first drug to treat autism. Troy, do you just want to kind of share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's been around for a while, and leucovorin also has another name called folinic acid. So leucovorin and folinic acid are exactly the same, and it's one of the forms of folate that is found in nature through the foods that we eat, but they were able to make this in a lab to mimic the same form that we take via our food. We know that the folate receptor has been an issue with kids with autism, with kids with ADHD and several other things. So they're really starting to catch up. The science has been out there for a while, but the mainstream is starting to catch up with that and starting to look at it and no longer look at it as, oh, wow, there's no way that something that's natural could have this kind of effect on our bodies. But the truth is, most of our medications, if they're effective, come from something in nature that it's trying to mimic. It's rare that we come up with something just out of the blue that works. So this is another scenario where nature was way ahead of us. And when we got to the point where we were eating too many processed foods, or we were adding folic acid, which is a synthetic form of folate that does not mimic what is in nature, and isn't processed by a lot of individuals, I think that's when we started to see a veering off of the good health that we had for years. And to me, I think it is one of several factors that has been linked to autism itself by increasing folic acid intake as opposed to natural folates.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have done a lot here to kind of address that, with our prenatal vitamins using methylated forms of folate, having other products that have methylated forms of folate that we just know have all kind of benefits. Methylation is a very important process, and it's something that not a lot of people know about.
Absolutely.
To kind of wrap things up today, I think we want to touch on just some really positive things that we have seen in the news lately. Our HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy, has made some really lofty promises, and I think we have seen, just even from the conversation getting started about the ingredients that are in our food, some really positive moves on the side of the manufacturers. Troy, you were featured in an article recently talking about Tyson Foods, that they announced a major change to many of their beloved products, which was to remove high fructose corn syrup from their products. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that first article we discussed already, which is trying to remove a lot of these added sugars that we're putting in our foods. And the more that we remove, the better off we're going to be, because um, we've already talked about the link that it's got to diabetes, to ADHD, to so many different things. And I think the more we do that and the more we start to understand that as a culture and as individuals, and we begin to change our buying practices, that is what is going to affect a lot of these larger companies. Because clearly Tyson Foods wasn't just motivated out of the goodness of their heart. They
That's right.
saw this need, they saw this move, and thankfully there's this critical mass that's behind it, and we're starting to see that, hey, something's wrong with our food. These processed foods are bad for us. What can we do to start changing it? And we're starting to change our buying habits, and you're seeing new products pop up that will end up taking market share. So if Tyson Foods recognizes it, I think there is a big move that's starting to happen. And I'm hopeful that that's just one step in the right direction across the culture as a whole.
That's really amazing, Troy. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your insights. We're definitely going to keep up with some of these stories where we see these food producers reacting to consumer preferences, like you just said, for the better. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode of the Frontline Health Podcast by Centurion. Be sure to tune in the future for more stories like this. As always, we encourage you to go out today and take ownership of your health, because you are your best health advocate. If you enjoyed what you heard today on the podcast, please consider leaving us a review. We would love to hear your feedback and connect with you further. You can also follow us on Instagram, X, TikTok, and YouTube. And for safe, effective, and affordable health and wellness products made in the USA, visit www.centurion.health. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.